Hello and welcome to this episode of the Three Pillars Academy, focused on being engaged in your campus and community. I am Marcus Bishop, Assistant Director of Operations and Championships here at the America East Conference. And for this episode, I'm joined by Skyler Nash from the University of Vermont. Skyler, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's quickly jump in. I want to give our audience a chance to learn a little bit more about you as a person and your experience, why you chose the University of Vermont, and a little bit about your path and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I grew up on the south side of Chicago, played basketball for my entire life. A lot of other different sports, but basketball was always my love and my passion. It's a really integral part of the culture, not just on the south side of the city, but the entire city as a whole. I think, that's kind of one of the things that we're known for nationwide and worldwide even, deservedly so, I might add. That is the Mecca. But honestly, the America East in Vermont was never really on the forefront of my mind in terms of my early recruitment. I was recruited at a higher level. I kind of look at my recruitment in two different forms. I say that because after I began my recruitment process around my junior year, about 16 years old, I got sick and was in the hospital for an extended period of time, was diagnosed with cancer, was able to get a life-saving colonoscopy due to my mom's mama bear instincts and her forcing kind of my doctors, long story short, to give me that procedure, and was able to get a diagnosis and early intervention, which I'm really thankful for, but was not really sure the type of player that I would be, or even if I was going to be able to continue to be a player after that. And so kind of had to set the reset button, not just on my athletics, but also kind of my life and my outlook on life. And so that's why I kind of consider my recruitment process to be in two different parts, and decided to, at the end of my senior year, didn't really feel like I had fully gotten back to where I wanted to be physically in that recovery. So decided to go to Maine and do a post-grad year there as a prep school player and student, which is where I was able to finally get a lot of East Coast attention in terms of my recruitment and finally get connected with the University of Vermont and the America East Conference.
Wow, that's an incredible story. You've definitely seen a lot. Fun note for the audience, I know that we were able to connect at the conference's first ever Spread Respect Forum.
Yes.
It's a pretty unique experience where student athletes, coaches, administrators, campus personnel were all able to come together and have some really good conversation on diversity and inclusion, social justice issues, and just have a great atmosphere for discussion. Can you share a little bit about, your thoughts on that experience and what type of impact those conversations had on you?
Yeah, I think it just shows what a special conference we are. You say that it's a pretty unique opportunity, and I think that it is. We've been, as a conference, and certainly I think at the University of Vermont, leaders on having those discussions and the intersection of those issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the power of sports. I think is it's a really special intersection, and one that we really need to lean into, especially at the college level. And the conference was amazing in terms of all the speakers that we had, from Dr. Richard Lapchick to just hearing from different activists and student athletes and administrators from different institutions in the conference. It's not often that we're all in the same space, not in a competitive sense, but really in a collaborative sense, and getting to learn from each other and go through experiences, maybe some good, some bad, and kind of troubleshooting things. And really get into that mindset was a really special time.
So, Skyler, that's a really great point. You actually shared a lot of great insight into your experiences during the Spread Respect Forum as you were a member of one of our panels, or a couple of our panels. I'm just curious, after having spent time at Vermont in the community and athletics department on campus, what are some issues you have seen in relation to diversity, inclusion, race relations, or social justice?
Yeah, I think one of the struggles, not just for our university, but I think for a lot of the institutions in our conference, is that it's a lot of predominantly white institutions and campuses. And so how do you, knowing that, find spaces and ways to successfully integrate, minority student athletes, students, communities into that kind of campus climate in an inclusive way and in a meaningful way? And I think that that's a national conversation that we're having. And I know here at UVM, we've taken that really seriously, and our administrators have taken that really seriously. And I think it's been interesting for me. I don't necessarily know if I anticipated this being one of the issues, was that, we were able to find ways to create spaces for student athletes of color, for students of color, to kind of create community within, amongst ourselves. And I think that that's a really important first step. But then the issue being, how do you find meaningful ways that don't compromise the affinity of that safe space, so to speak, while also integrating that community with the larger campus community. So you see, us all coming together and moving forward to that, end goal of the campus climate as a whole being inclusive to everybody. And that's something that we're constantly thinking about amongst ourselves. And I think as a conference and different communities around the country, we're thinking about ways to do that in a valuable way, but also without compromising that sacred space that is so important. When you find yourself as a person of color on a predominantly white campus, it is really important and valuable to have that space where you can bond with people. We're not a monolithic group and we don't all have the same experience, but it is a unique experience that we do share and can learn from having that space. So that has been one of, I think, the biggest struggles in terms of you're thinking about moving forward rather than just addressing the problem at hand that I didn't necessarily anticipate, but it is something that we spent a lot of time thinking about. And I know I've spent a lot of time thinking about it myself.
Right. And so I know in connection to that, there are a lot of different issues that you feel that need to be pushed out there, move forward, continue to build together as a group and move forward. One example I think I've seen you talk a little bit more about is the issue of equal pay. I think at our Spread Respect Forum, you actually had a shirt that said #equal-pay.
Yeah.
And I believe it was through your involvement with the Burlington High School girls soccer team. Could you tell us a little bit more about your involvement with that group?
Yeah, honestly, my involvement with them began with me being in awe of kind of the movement that they had started, in its infancy, and just seeing that come across, my feed was just immediately impressed at, younger student athletes taking initiative and taking advantage of that platform that they had in their community at their school to speak out. I think it's something that takes a lot of courage, and I think that there's a lot of us, as we get into college or even past college, we don't necessarily recognize that capacity for leadership or activism in ourselves. And so to see them do that around such an important issue was really impressive to me, and I wanted to support them in any way that I could. And so just my involvement began with me just kind of helping to boost their message, I think, and elevate their message in any way that I could. And thankfully they were able to catch fire in a way that they no longer needed me elevating their message. It was elevated sufficiently, that's for sure. They, through no, they didn't owe anything to me. But and then I just thought it was important, knowing that we had that Spread Respect conference after I had received one of my jerseys, to wear that and kind of use my platform in that way. And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways I know that I had, and I think a lot of people talked to me about when listening to our keynote speaker, Dr. Richard Lapchick, about not necessarily always being the leader or the activist, but also playing the part of the ally, and using your privilege and your platforms to be an ally. And so that was just one small way that I saw that I could be an ally to them and their movement and support the really good work that they were doing.
So speaking of being an ally, I know that you like to use your social media accounts to really bolster those issues, educate folks on what's going on. Can you talk to us a little bit about your use of social media when you're educating others on your passions or other issues that are out there, and what other, I guess, mediums that you may use to communicate with others when it comes to sharing that message as well?
Yeah, no, I think social media can get a bad rap, and it can, especially as student athletes, you think, can present some negative potential in its uses. But I think it, like all things, it's in how you use it. And I think that it's an opportunity, that I've seized for myself as a student athlete to use it as a way for me to define myself and my experiences in my own words, and in ways that we don't necessarily always get the opportunities to as student athletes. And whether I'm involved in an internship or through work and have these experiences that I gain value from, I like to use my social media as a way to bring attention to those issues, or try to pay forward that value to my peers and my friends, but also to try to lead, by example of getting involved and speaking up about issues that you care about. It doesn't necessarily have to be issues that we all agree on, but I think the more of us that are using that platform that we have, whether, if you have 10,000 followers or if you have, 200 followers, that's still your platform, and you can use it and make an imprint that way. And so, I think I talk a lot about learning and evolving, and giving each other the space to learn and evolve and do it in public. But I also want to live that myself. And so that's another way that I really try to use my social media is to showcase the ways, throughout the years that when I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I think we have to give each other and ourselves space to make mistakes and evolve and grow. And so I try to use my social media to practice what I preach in that regard.
Right. And so it definitely seems like, from a student athlete perspective, you've really been able to take advantage of the platform you have
Mhm.
in that role. So I'm curious, when thinking about athletics, what role do you think athletics can play in the issues of social justice,
Yeah.
diversity, and inclusion, race relations, things of that nature?
A huge role. And as a short answer, I think, especially when you're looking at college athletics, for better or for worse, and whichever side you want to take for that, student athletes are leaders on their campuses. And depending on how they use that platform, that can be a good or a bad thing. But every time I'm talking here at UVM, I always say, as we go, the university and our peers are going to follow because we are on that elevated platform, and have that higher degree of visibility. And so that's a responsibility that we can choose to take on. And Bev Colston, who's the director of our Mosaic Center here, who's like my proxy East Coast mom, but we're always talking about, we don't look down on people who don't take on that responsibility or want to carry some of that load on their shoulders, but some of us need to, and the more of us that become stakeholders in that and take that responsibility upon us and take it seriously, the better off we're going to be for it, especially those of us, on college campuses, student athletes, administrators, who have a higher degree of authority or power or platform.
Right. And so, these issues are tough conversations. They're not the easiest things to talk about. And so for some, it may be a little bit more difficult to
Mhm.
build up the courage to be able to voice their opinion or pursue their passion. You've obviously been able to have that experience at UVM. So I'm curious, what advice do you have for athletic departments and university personnel as they allow individuals or give individuals the resources and tools to go confidently and pursue their passion and voice
Yeah.
their concern and voice their opinion?
Yeah, I was telling a lot of people who came up to me after one of the panels that I sat on at the conference, and they said, you're talking about these really important and delicate issues and kind of dancing around them, and like, how do you do that without, so confidently? And I told them I get nervous all the time when I'm talking about these things. Leadership and speaking out and trying to push conversations and policies and communities forward can be a terrifying thing to do, and it can be really lonely, frankly. But you do it and you hope that when you turn around or turn to your left or your right, that people are going to be alongside you or coming up behind you. But it's also your duty as a leader, when you start to get that platform and you're empowered to reach behind you and reach to the sides of you and bring people along with you. And I know that that's something that I've taken really seriously this past year is, my platform on campus has risen through the work that we've been doing to recognize that there are going to be people who have the potential to make a really big impact, but they just have been either conditioned to think that they don't have the capacity to be an activist or a leader, or they just don't see that in themselves. And it's our jobs as people who have kind of arrived at that point or who have been empowered to do that, to help them, give them opportunities to start to see that capacity within themselves. And once you do that, then it's just our job to get out of the way and let people go the different routes they're going to go. Everybody's leadership and activism is going to look a different way, but I think the more people that we have who see that capacity in themselves and want to, push the conversation forward, it might not be exactly where we want the conversation to go or where we envisioned it going. But I think the more voices that we have at the table, the more representation that we have, the better off we're going to be.
Great thoughts. That's actually a great segue into my last question, which is really, if you could give individuals one piece of advice on how to make an impact when they
Mhm.
really think that they don't have the opportunity to make an impact, what are things that they could do, small or large, that can really make an impact, even though they may think it's not going to make an impact?
Yeah, no, as I talk about kind of leadership and pushing conversations forward can be a scary thing. I think one thing that people overlook, but can also be the scariest part about that, is it starts with the people that are closest to you. As student athletes, your teammates being in that locker room or your closest friends. I think that's one small way that you can start, but it has a big impact and it takes a lot of courage. It's not easy to go and talk to people that you see every day and really try to challenge them on really what can be sensitive and emotional topics. And so to find your voice that way, and if you can start and you can start to excel with that, I think that's one way you can see a really big change. But that also, in a lot of ways, is the hardest part, I think. And after that, once you really found your voice in that way, branching out, I think, becomes a lot easier. But you also gain a lot of respect and credibility from your peers from starting that way.
Well, Skyler, all of that has been so impactful throughout this conversation. I think you've left a lot for our audience to really think about. I know that myself and the conference, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this episode. Thank you so much for taking the time. And for our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Three Pillars Academy.
Well,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.